Okay, we're about to start, so please put your phones on silent, mute, turned off, whatever.
Okay, hello everyone. The central theme of last week's Parsha and the beginning part of this week's Parsha deals with the 10 plagues, with the Eser Makos, She'evi HaKadosh Baruch Hu ala Mitzrim b'Mitzrayim. One of the central topics that the Meforshim deal with is what was the purpose of the 10 plagues? What lesson are we supposed to derive from it? And to a certain extent, it is an attempt to understand how heaven works, which remains mysterious to us till the very end. We don't know how it works upon us individually, and we don't know how it works upon us nationally. That was the purpose of Nevuah, of the prophets of Israel, was to give us an insight into heaven. That's what it means when the Navi Yeshaya said, "Vo'eres Hashem Yoshev al Kisei Ron Denisa." I see the Lord sitting on the. What? He can't see the Lord. God does not have a chair. There's no throne. But the spirit of prophecy is, I had an insight for once into how heaven works. And I understood that the Lord sends certain people at certain times to do certain things. And that's how he becomes the Navi. That's his great Nevuah, the Navi Yeshayahu. So we're always looking for an insight into heaven. And heaven always remains mysterious to us. Anistoros Lashem Elokeinu. Nobody can say what is going on today. No one understands what's going on. You see, all the great experts are idiots. The greater the expertise, the greater the idiocy. Nobody knows what's going on here. What's the message? So what's the message with the 10 plagues? And the Torah devotes a great deal of space to them. 1.5 parshas. And then the Pesach Seder, we will all sit together and recite and have the cup of wine in front of us. What's the purpose? So there are many different streams, as you can imagine, amongst the Meforshim as to try and give us an insight into the purpose. And maybe the purpose is all of them together. That they should not be mutually exclusive. But that takes a certain breadth of conception, a certain ability to really see the big picture that most of us are not given. It's not part of us. That's reserved for rabbis. Certain rabbis. Local rabbis. So if we do Pasha Pshat, we do the simple explanation. The Makos were there to force Paro to let the Jewish people out of Egypt. It's what in our terms we call lachatz tzva'i, military pressure. That'll give us back the hostages, that'll get rid of Hamas, that'll guarantee that we're going to live happily ever after. That's the purpose. To force Paro and the Egyptians to let my people go. The Rambam seems to follow that, and it seems to be the simple explanation in the Psukim. However, there are logical difficulties with understanding it that way. Because we read in the Psukim, the verses in the Torah itself, that the Lord prevents Paro from freeing the Jewish people. At the fourth Makkah, the wise men already said, Etzba Elohimi, they already saw. And Paro already admits that God is supreme. And Paro comes to negotiate how many are going to go out, what is going to win, and what. So then, why do you need all of these extra Makkos? What purpose do they serve? So again, if you see the whole thing in perspective, there are a lot of psukim that are intended to give us some light in the matter. So when Avraham Avinu had the dream by the Bris Bein Absarim, so the Rabbanu Shalom said to him, he sees in the dream, V'gam es hagoy asher yavodu don anochi. I will judge the nation that enslaved them. So here we have the question that everybody asks. If God hardens the heart of Pharaoh, then why does God punish Pharaoh? And if the purpose of the Makos is that they should go out of Egypt, and in order to go out of Egypt, Pharaoh has to agree, so we're working at cross purposes. We are hardening the heart of Pharaoh, so he'll say no. And we're giving him Makos, so he should say yes. Is that all fair? But the Rambam addresses this issue with his famous idea that there was no decree upon the Egyptians or upon Pharaoh, and that he had absolute free will until the end. And therefore, that's why the Lord could judge them. Because they didn't have to do this. Now, the Rambam is the ultimate extreme of free will. So we have in Judaism always a spectrum. On one side is free will, on the other side, to use the Yiddish word, it's everything is basher. It's all predestined. And there are many psukim in Tanakh that you can bring in the support of either of them. And stories in the Talmud that you can bring that support either of these extreme conclusions. And in Jewish folklore, Eastern European folklore, so marriage is basher, to whom you're going to marry. It's announced 40 days before you're born. Bas plodi leplodi. I remember that when I became engaged to Jackie, so I didn't have money for a ring. So I told her, well, we'll do it without a ring. I said, because it's basher to be that way. So she said, that's the cheapest basher I ever heard of. It's basher, it's gotta happen, it's gotta happen. So the moment you say it's gotta happen, not my fault. I'm not responsible. I don't have to do anything. So how are we going to deal with Paro? So the Rambam goes to the other extreme. The Rambam says that, so to speak, almost nothing is basher. There's a general basher that encompasses all of humanity, and that the Ribono Shalom runs the world. But it's not basher that A has to do something. A has the choice that whether he wants to do it or not. So that would be one way of looking here, that the Eser Makos come to force Paro to agree to let the Jewish people leave Mitzrayim. The Ramban takes a different attitude completely. According to the Rambam, all the Makos are to influence the Egyptians. The Jews are, so to speak, the bystanders here. They're the observers, but it's not for them. The Ramban disagrees. The Ramban says that the Makos were for the Jewish people. He says that's the Poshet Pshat and the Posik Laman Shisi Yosef Sai B'Mitzrayim V'Yodu Ki Ani Hashem. So it says V'Yodu, and they will know that I am Hashem. Who will know? So again, Poshet Pshat, the way Rashi learns, the Egyptians will know. The Ramban says no, V'Yodu, the Jewish people will know. The whole purpose here is that the Jewish people should become the Am HaNivchor. They should become the chosen people. They'll go out with great reward. The great reward is they'll be Makabel the Torah at Har Sinai. They'll accept Torah. They'll become the light unto the nations. They'll be the greatest influence on humanity and the history of human beings. So V'Yodu Ki Ani Hashem refers to the Jewish people. And therefore the Makos were to impress the Jewish people that the Ribono Shalom here is serious about them. Because if the purpose was merely to force Paro to agree, there were myriad ways that could have been accomplished without the Makos. And we see that Paro himself is close to it. He's willing to let him go. He doesn't want to let the cattle go, but he's willing to have a ceasefire. So the second stream, which is the Ramban, is that all the Makos are to impress the Jewish people. And therefore, Makas Bechoros is the culminating Makkah, because the Jewish people were exempted from it. And that's what we remember. Kili kol bechor b'Yisrael. All of Pesach is based upon that. It's to impress upon the Jewish people how special they are, and that, so to speak, nature will aid them in remaining special and in thinking of themselves as special. So you have the Rambam and you have the Ramban. There's a third shita, which seems to be Rashi, though Rashi doesn't say it specifically. The greatness of Rashi is that hundreds of Perushim have been written to explain what Rashi means. And Rashi, in his simple language, is the most complex of all of the Meforshim. There are entire books written. Why did Rashi say this? And why did he say that? And why did he quote this medrash? But here it seems to be that the Makos came to punish the Egyptians. One of the fundamental ideas in Judaism is eventually there's judgment. We may not see it immediately. We may not even see it in retrospect. But if you say that God lets things slide, that there is no accountability, you missed the whole boat. That's not true. So there has to be a reckoning here with Egypt. 80 years of slavery. And those were the Makos. Each of the Makos was intended as a form of punishment for the behavior of the Egyptians. And therefore we can come to an understanding, glimpse at least, that that's why God hardens the heart of the Egyptians, and why that's legitimate. Because the degree of punishment is not yet fulfilled. It can only be fulfilled if they keep on refusing. And therefore, that's, so to speak, the Midas Adin, the judgment upon the Egyptians. And the 10 Makos reflected. There were Makos in the water, and Makos on the earth, and Makos in the animals, that are the wealth they had, and then Makos in their own physical being. So it's intended as a punishment. Naturally, as a punishment, it is meant to make an impression on both the Jewish and non-Jewish world. That there are punishments that come. There's no free lunch. And eventually, all the empires paid a price for what they did. And that's an inexorable rule of history. You can wonder, how did the Greeks, how did the Romans, how did the Catholic Church, how did the medieval powers, how did the British Empire, how did the Soviet Union, how did they all fall? In their time, they're invincible. Not only that, they last a long time. Roman Empire was 500 years. If you're living in the middle of it, you'll think it'll be there forever. If you're born, in the time when Hadrian was the emperor, you cannot imagine that the Roman Empire would collapse. And you can't imagine why it would collapse. And in our time, we have seen that with the Soviet Union. And we hope to see it with Iran and with other enemies. Eventually, the bill has to be paid. So the great Spanish Empire dissolved after they got rid of the Jews. Portugal was the main maritime power in the world. It had colonies all over Africa and Asia. Why did it collapse? And without being a prophet or an expert on anything, I think that the days of the United States as being the sole power in the world are also beginning to wane. So someone else will come. There's a midsadin. There's a judgment. And the follies of nations eventually are paid for. In the 19th century, Bismarck built Germany into the major power in Europe. It was a challenge to the British Empire. Germany was the central economy. It was the largest, as it is today, the largest population. There's nothing inherent that forced Germany to the folly of the two world wars. But that's what happens. So there's this idea that came because of the punishment. And that's why we have the 10 plagues. There's another idea that the Meforshim also advance, fourth way of looking at this. Is that the plagues came because it says, Uveloheihem also shvotim. The Rebbe Shalom did justice and punishment to the gods, to the paganism of the time. Each of the plagues, so to speak, represented a different form of avodah zarah. Some more subtle, some more obvious. And in order to promote avodah zarah, you always have to do tricks. You need the media to do it for you. So only the media can convince you, that boys can be girls, girls can be boys. That mutilating children's a good idea. Killing babies in the womb is a good idea. So how do you get over that? So God, so to speak, has to destroy the gods of Avodah Zarah. He has to expose them. Sometimes that happens quickly. Sometimes it takes time, centuries. In our time, one of the things that we witness that no one speaks about, again, except for very local rabbis, is the decline of the church and of Christianity generally in the world. We no longer live in a Christian society. It's a secular society. It's post-Christian. Because Christianity was exposed by the Holocaust. The church is almost powerless. You know, you don't hear the Pope say anything about anything, right? At least tell us who's going to win the Major League Baseball. Something. Say something. Nothing. Church has nothing to say. And all of the basic tenets of the church have been undermined by the Western world. Something which 300 years ago was unimaginable. In America, they burned witches. So the purpose of the Makos was to undermine the belief in the gods. That's why it says, "V'elehem oso shpot." I will judge their gods. You want to worship, the Gemara says, you know, the Arabs worship the dust of their feet. Good, I'll bring kinin. There was the famous medrash that we know that was a giant frog. The giant frog was the idol that they worshipped. And from that giant frog, everybody had a little frog in their house. Go down the whole list. Or of the wild animals. You go on a safari, you see the lions and the jaguars and everybody else. The tribes worship them. It was one of the great sophisticated accomplishments of the Jewish people is to be able to compare themselves to the animals, Gur Arya Yehuda, and not to make a god out of it. The cattle, so the Jews made a god out of it that became Begel Azov. Because the cattle represented the economy, represented money. Money is a great god. As I will say, Reuben Begezo. Most people don't pass the test. So we have to have a plague that shows that it's not like that. And the idea of Makas Bechoros is that idea that you're going to survive. There'll be another generation who'll keep on going forever. No. God is going to interrupt it. And when the interruption comes, that's what it is. There's nothing more. that's gonna happen afterwards. I would say, Great Britain, which is not so great anymore, is never gonna have Hong Kong again. Now, if I would have told you 100 years ago, after the end of the First World War, then I would tell you that the British Empire is gone. You could look at me like an ignorant yeshiva bacher. But it's gone. It's so gone that there's no one that wants to revive it, not even in England. That's Makas Bachoros. No future. So that was the purpose of the plagues. Purpose of the plagues was I'll show you that all the gods that you believed in are forfeit. They are all false. They will not stand the test of time. Since we are only here a short period of time, relatively speaking, so it's hard for us to think in those terms. But the Torah thinks in terms of eternity. And in terms of eternity, all the gods have to collapse. We say that in our prayers. We want to, because the gods will fall, everything will fall. The only thing is left is you. So these are different interpretations, possible understandings of why the Makos came upon the Egyptians for different purposes. And again, as I pointed out in the beginning, I don't think they are mutually exclusive. There are different insights into the same idea, that there's a purpose here, and that the purpose has many different consequences and strikes different people in a different way. But it's all orchestrated by heaven in order to create the Jewish people and to bring us to the acceptance of the Torah. So have a good Shabbos, everyone. Shabbat Shalom U'Barach, and thank you. Saturday night is the last lecture in the Civil War series.